Thank you all for being here, to my audience and to my guests. Really excited. This is the Amazon Lily Roundtable, which have rarely, but when we do, it's Tuesdays, 8 p.m. Eastern. If you're watching this on YouTube, please like, comment, subscribe, and consider becoming a YouTube member by hitting that join button. Helps us out a ton. When you do that, if you appreciate this content, want to see more of it, then hit that join button, become a member. It's just that way. I'm going to introduce all these amazing individuals who are joining us. I'm super psyched, like for a few reasons here. So we'll start with Zonia. Zonia, a really kind member of my community, right? We don't bully Zonia, not yet. But Zonia, we don't bully you.
Ryan,
Yep.
Zealous is not in the call.
Oh, did she fall out? Okay, let me pull that again. Hey, yeah, buddy. So, Zonia, tell the world about yourself.
I am Zonia, and it is great to be back. Great to see everybody. Had a little break from panels for a while there to sort of cool things down, and I'm liking being back. So as usual, Zonia Dead, and at Twitch, you guys all know who I am though, and looking forward to this discussion. Probably going to get in a little trouble too. And Pixel has agreed to back me on every one of my problematic and bad takes.
Alliances already? What the fuck? Shay, you're on my side then. Fuck you. You don't have your own opinions.
Okay. All right, love to see it. All right, backstab and ahoy. Let's go to Pixel Smixel. Everyone. All right, I gotta pause for a second, okay? I have been trying to get this one onto this channel for a year plus, I think. I should scroll back in our DMs and figure out.
It's a while. It's definitely a while.
It's been a while. And it's been a fight. I had to live up to you. No, I mean, I know, okay. I just looked up. I scrolled up. And it says that August 8th is the first time I've ever DM'd you. August 8th, 2020. Hello, Pixel. We talked a few weeks ago when I rated you, and you were kind enough to stop by my channel. I was wondering if you'd be interested in an all-women panel I'm putting together. As of now, this will be an invite-only panel, but we may allow female audience members to join in the future. In case you don't know, I've already expanded my usual walk-on panel format to invite-only as well. It's called the Reverie, and below is the latest. Yeah, I get this whole thing. I got this like whole
great
thing.
Great sell.
Yeah, it's actually quite extensive. I'm looking at this message. It's extremely extensive. And I don't know. It's paid off. You've been a worthy opponent, but I win in the end.
In the end.
So Pixel, thanks for being here.
You're very welcome. I avoided panels for a really long time. Mainly because I was just really nervous about, I guess, a lot of the drama that gets associated with panels. And then a pandemic happened, and I got like stuck in my house for a very long time, and it was like super lonely. And I don't know. It was like, okay, well, maybe I'll have some conversations, and look, I'll try and avoid as much drama as I can, but. Yeah, that's kind of how I started saying yes to panels. And now, here I am.
Been a long road. But again, I'm very happy. I'm very happy that we're here. All right.
I'm happy to be here.
Yeah. Next, we have Cyrus, social climbing socialist. Hello. Hi. Thanks for being here. I don't know anything about you. You were recruited by another lovely member. But Cyrus, please introduce yourself to me and my community.
Hey, I'm the social climbing socialist. I go by like any and all pronouns. I'm pretty new to streaming. I went on the open panel after the Mr. Girl panel that Prime did, and I'm mostly like here in Twitch politics because I think I got tired of like just screaming alone at my computer, and I want to like actually interact with people and not just do that, you know? Present my ideas in like a kinder way to actual human beings.
Oh, thank you. Well, And I should have told you to that's Pixel as well. I mean, there's no drama on this channel. It's foreign to us, right? Only kind debating, all right? Only kind discussions between peers across the world, really. Bringing minds together. That's what we're about here. So thank you for stopping by, Sibes. It's really nice to meet you. Okay, we're gonna go clockwise, all right? Next, we'll go to Lana the God. Hello, hi. Nice to meet you as well. Also don't know who you are. Also recruited by another lovely panelist. Lana, please tell myself and my audience about you.
Hi, I'm Lana. I was a pretty active member on CC. I don't really go on there anymore. I'm in college for econ. I work, I go to school, and I don't know, I'm really into politics, so yeah.
Okay, thank you. All right. Next we have Zealous. We are here in a non-explosive panel. I hope things are I hope you all enjoyed this better than the last time you were around. That was crazy. But Zealous, thank you for not being scared away from that open panel. Can you hear us? Zealous. I don't think she can. Zealous! Zealous, you. Yes, you. You. Zealous, you. Zealous. Okay, I'm gonna DM her.
You can hear, but I think her mic isn't working for some reason.
Okay, all right. Well, I'll work on that in the background. While we're doing that, Shay, I'd said so many nice things about her. Shay, thanks for coming through. I know you. I know your voice. Because you appear with another of our panelists on a thing, right? A YouTube channel that you guys are doing together. How are you? And introduce yourself to the audience.
I'm really great. I'm actually really excited. I'm really new to streaming. Like you said, me and Katie just started doing a little podcast. So, I'm just really excited to get to know everyone, see everyone's views, and, just hash it out, I guess.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Next, we'll go to someone who is not quite a stranger. April. April's back with us. April, who joined us on that from this panel of Mr. Girl, right? But April, thanks for coming back. Thanks for not being scared away from that one. Oh boy, I have a lot of panels that might terrify individuals, but April, I think you handled yourself really well in that one. So I'm really glad that you stopped by and joined us once again. How are you?
Doing good. Champion of the PrimeCayes panel has returned. We can talk about some politics. I think it'll be fun. Taftage or April, you can call me. I do Twitch politics and share all sorts of opinions. Sometimes they're super cringe, sometimes they're really good. That's just how it goes. Hopefully it'll be a fun conversation.
Okay. All right. All right. So last, but not quite last really, but I'm we're working on it. But we have Katie. I am so pleased to have her here. Katie is the one who helped put this together. It was her idea. She demanded it, and I acquiesced. Right? I do that a lot. But Katie, she's been an amazing member of this community. Right? Fantastic. And she stepped up. She's like, I want this to happen, and she assembled this. Right? So thank you, Katie.
Yeah, I think what I wanted is an excuse to hang out with a bunch of people I thought were cool. So I just invited a bunch of my friends and people I don't get to hang out with a lot. And we just pretend that it's a panel. And we're actually just going to talk about nail polish and hair. And that's what we're doing. This was all trick, Prime. I'm sorry.
No, you got me.
But it's fine because you let us talk about men for like 2 seconds and it will get heated. So it's fine.
I'm waiting for it. Zealous, can you hear us? Can you hear me? You're muted in Discord right now. Not sure if you can. Do I have a mod in chat? Maybe Matt Lattin's around who can assist us with that. I'll send him a message. Maybe he can assist. But okay, well, we'll do that in the background, and hopefully we can get that sorted
Maybe
out.
if you eat one of those chocolates, Prime,
No,
Madvan would come and help.
no, thanks.
Why
All right. We'll get started, and I'm gonna work on that in the background. All right. Topic 1. Jack Wright and Sienna May Gomez are 2 incredibly successful social media influencers. They are TikTok stars with gargantuan channels who collaborated together to make content. Now, Jack is accusing Sienna of sexual assault. Previously, they were both minors during their working relationship. This follows many other allegations of assault or abuse directed at various online creators. However, the response to this particular incident is decidedly mixed. If the allegations against Sienna are true, is this incident as damaging as when a male forces himself onto a woman? Sienna and Jack were at various times romantically involved. Does that change how the situation should be viewed? Do women get away with violations against men more? If so, is this a problem that deserves serious societal consideration? This is a very extensive question. I want to be proud of myself, okay? All right. So lots of things to talk about here. We'll do opening statements. We'll start with our good friend Zonia, please.
Yeah, so I didn't even know who these 2 were until I got the topics for this panel. And so I had to do a little bit of research and learn about who they were and what it was all about. And it does seem like a pretty clear case of sexual assault, but it looks like there was a close friendship that may have gotten even closer than friendship at a couple instances, and that might have been used to sort of excuse away the sexual assault. But I think that one of the big issues that I've definitely observed, and I decided to paste into our group chat. This is a video that I saw a couple years ago when I was interested in the topic of um, men being emasculated in the media, in popular media in particular, and sexual assault of men being downplayed, and how it's a problem that is not only just culturally reinforced, but continually reinforced in our everyday movies, cartoons, shows, even children's shows, which I felt was an interesting thing to observe. And like rape jokes and prison rape jokes are common, to hint at and laugh at the fragility of men and the emasculation of men. And so I see that a lot of similar kind of echoes of that going on with the dialogue around this particular situation. And so, yeah, I think this is something that is downplayed too much. It's used to sort of mock, and it greatly inhibits the ability for or prevents men from being more open about these experiences that they have and the assaults that they've suffered. And yeah, I think it's something that we need to open society's eyes to more and make men feel empowered to speak up about these things without fear of being mocked.
Thank you, Pixel.
For me, the takeaway from this situation, or at least how I've been thinking about it, is that sexual assault is obviously never okay, but there is some extremely difficult things that we have to navigate now in society, including these very well publicized relationships between young people. I can't even imagine how difficult it must be these days to navigate a personal life as a teenager, especially if you're making content out of your life and then having something like this happen in front of millions of people. Kind of like what Zonia was saying about how men in this situation kind of get mocked and ridiculed, but like, oh, you should be, oh, mate, like, why do you even care? Like, that's a huge problem. And it's also a huge problem how quickly people are willing to jump on a woman who is accused of sexual assault, because I also think that kind of manifests within the patriarchy as well. So I just think it's a really complex time to navigate these things in a public forum. That being said, I obviously want to bookend saying that with sexual assault is never okay, no matter who you are, between whoever. but yeah, I think we'll have some very interesting discussions about this evening. That's probably where I want.
Let's go to Cyrus.
Yeah. There was like one thing that stuck out to me there. One question that you asked, which is about like, I'm probably going to phrase this poorly, but whether or not it's worse, if it's a woman being assaulted. It's something that like I've been turning over in my head. I think that regardless of whether or not it is, I think people have like an instinctive revulsion towards it, specifically like penetration, regardless of whether or not it's a woman or a man being penetrated. I think that is where people have like the most instinctive revulsion and disgust and fear. Like they imagine being very afraid at that prospect, but it doesn't matter. That's kind of like what I want to come to is like, it doesn't matter that feeling or whether or not it's correct. What matters is it's all completely wrong. If you violate somebody's consent, you're a piece of shit. It looks very clearly to me like this woman violated his consent. They have videos of it. It's like almost like a case closed as much as it can be on a social media site.
All right. Let's go to Lana.
Yeah, clearly, like, sexual assault is wrong, no matter, like, who's perpetrating it, no matter who the victim is. The victim being, like, a man or somebody who's viewed as, like, having power in a situation, like, shouldn't matter. And clearly, like, something like preventative, a preventative measure would be something like comprehensive sex education that actually talks about, like, consent for, like, young people who are, like, just forming their identities around sexuality and understanding, like, how to engage with sex in a healthy way, learning about their bodies and all that would be a much better approach than, basically ignoring the problem and hoping that, if you just shame people for making mistakes that they've been taught to do, like, you're basically just going to beat the problem to death. And I'm not saying people shouldn't be accountable for their actions. I'm just saying, like, if you want to resolve the problem, like, you need better sex ed, and that's, like, a really good place to start.
Let's go to Shay.
So, going into this, I was kind of like, I didn't really know where to start. I kind of went in with the bias that even if these sexual assaults do happen to men, it's probably not as much as women. And going into it, I realized, like, that's a really toxic sort of bias that I had. And sort of realized that no matter what type of relationship you have to sort of set up these boundaries. There was a discussion we had a while ago where, you're not going to ask permission to touch your partner's ass. You know what I mean? That's just like, that might be it. And because that's a pre-established boundary. But a lot of us don't really grow up with that kind of knowledge, with that kind of instruction. And so the lines can sometimes blur and get very messy. And I just think, kind of going off what Lana said, that's a really important sexual education, and being able to have your child, or when they're growing up, being able to come to you and express certain things, and you being able to maybe correct problematic behavior and help them. I think that's a good place to start.
Thank you. All right, let's go to April.
Great. I think it's really difficult to analyze someone else's relationship from the outside in. And whenever these sorts of things come up in regards to any crime, really, I think that everyone's very eager to jump in and to talk about, to drop their hot takes. But ultimately, looking in from the outside, I think that it's so easy to not understand people's dynamic. So I think that, like, it might be good in this conversation to, like, broaden things out to just generally talking about sex and consent and relationships and the differences between how that works for one gender and another. And I'll say that there's a lot of ways to violate consent, right? It's not just about penetration. And I think penetration is one of these things that, like, it's the easiest to imagine. It's the easiest one to think about because it's so obvious, like, how it's wrong and how negative it is. But I think for, like, a lot of men, and this is maybe something that is hard to understand, like, if you don't have a penis, but, like, there's such a thing as like continued consent throughout sex, and like, you know, just for example, like if you're having sex with someone and you've agreed to like pull out and they're not like letting you, that can be a violation of consent that's like very serious that men have to deal with and navigate. And so I think that that's part of it. With like Jack Wright and Sienna May Gomez, people have talked about like the videos, and those seem like pretty bad as well. I just think that like with these things, we have to kind of wait until more information is brought out with like a court case or whatever. And it sometimes feels a little bit gross to me to like speculate on it without that added information. But I just want to echo like what other people on the panel have already said, which is like it's really important for you to get consent and to get continued consent from people. And it definitely does not cut just one way. Consent is important to get from men and for men as well. So yeah, that's all I've got to say.
Katie.
So I was kind of like Zonia in the sense that I had no idea who these people are, and then I had to go and read a little bit. I haven't watched the videos in terms of the actual scandal. I'm happy that he felt safe and able to come forward with how he feels and what he's been through. I think that's very brave as a guy. I think it's a lot less normalized. And so I was happy that he's done that. In terms of their actual relationship, it sounds like there was confusion or whatever. It doesn't change the fact that at the end of the day, he felt very much violated, and that's a huge problem. So that's like in terms of the prompt. I'm hearing, of course, I agree with a lot of things that were said by everyone. I would just like to, I think it's interesting how when this prompt comes up, we're talking about like general consent, and like it's not about like men and women. When if it was talking about a scandal where a woman was hurt by a guy, I assume our openings would be a bit different, and we would talk about how women are in society and what burden that is, and blah and blah blah. And I just want to, if I'm getting that impression correctly, I would like personally to discuss the aspect of, yes, I would like to talk about consent, but I think there's an important element to it that in the same way that women aren't very socialized to learn that it's okay that they are not enjoying something and they have the right to stop or whatever, I think men are not socialized to even ask themselves, do I want this? So there are huge issues of socialization on both sides. And I think maybe because I've been in leftist spaces a lot, it's I've had the conversation about the women's stuff. I would like to talk about how men kind of have it rough in this respect as well. Although I agree that there is like obvious harm for everyone, I think. So that would be my point.
Just to clarify, like my own position, because I don't know if I'm assuming I'm one of the people you're referring to there. I just want to like draw parallels. And like
I actually don't think I was talking about you. If you want, I can call out the other people I was.
No.
Yeah, Shay, I'm looking at you.
I already know you have a hard time of truly understanding something. No, I'm just kidding.
Okay, it's good.
I want to say that's an interesting point to make. Like, I agree. Like, clearly, if we were talking, I get what you're saying. Like, you're really talking about like we should be discussing the gender dynamic related rather than like consent in general. And I agree, like, obviously there's always, like, more conversations to be had about consent, like, at any point in time. You know, clearly if you've, like, been in a really healthy relationship where you're, like, doing a lot of things where you're, like, talking about consent a lot, like, you can always talk about it more. But I get what you're saying, like, really, like, talking about how, like, men don't even ask themselves the question, like, even in, like, the BDSM community, like, a lot of people don't even realize that, like, doms should also be able to say no to something that they're uncomfortable with. And it's not just about like receiving something, it's also about like feeling comfortable like doing things to other people. And like obviously not all men are doms or whatever. I know that's a hot take. But you know, like clearly like thinking I get what you're getting at about like also thinking about the gender dynamics for men as well. That was interesting.
Yeah, I think in like in leftist spaces, or we've both been on CC a lot, right? Colopian Club. And there seems to be like a general awareness, at least in out of the people who I know are on this panel, that like there are certain issues with like in terms of how women deal with this situation, but it's kind of like how women will talk about feminism and then a guy would be like, you know, we have it rough too, but then we never get to talk about how they have it rough because we. So I think the prompt is really important to bring out how there are certain things that men have to deal with that and like to be very honest, I do care about humans, whoever they are, but I think that the issues with the way men are being socialized and the things that are hurting them are coming back to bite women in the
Hit my
ass. So
internet.
it's not
Yeah,
like I don't have a
that's what I
personal interest in this. You know?
yeah, and that's what I was going to suggest as well, is kind of bringing up that the it's a toxic kind of toxic masculinity that's bolstered by this mocking of the emasculation of men, right? So when it's common in our culture and in media and such, constantly reinforced that to be sexually assaulted is a form of weakness and a way of like emasculating and often feminizing a man, that comes back to bite us in the long run because that perpetuates more of this toxic masculine kind of mentality of that you shouldn't, that it's weak and demeaning to have been related to femininity and to be emasculated, right? So it feeds the problem. And I think that's a one of the issues that I remember witnessing when I was a kid. So I was raised masculine, right? And some of my friends were boys, and during that time you were kind of more encouraged to stay with your own gender, so to speak, right? And it was discouraged to hang around with girls because it was considered to be, feminine and thus weak, and you would be berated not only by other boys but even by the the men in your life and the father figures. And then inevitably I knew other boys who had been sexually assaulted, and they were afraid to even say anything about it because of that. And the worst of the ones were the ones that came out, particularly when they were sexually assaulted by women, older women, because the men in their lives would brush it off, would either not believe them at all or would brush it off as like, hey, you just scored with a woman. What are you talking about? And this is from like teachers, like adult women sexually assaulting their students and such, or sexually assaulting boys that they're around. And father figures and fathers and gym teachers and other men in their lives basically brushing it off as, why are you even complaining? So there's so much of a cultural problem around this. Is it to have two things pressing in on you? One is the emasculation and the way you look to the rest of society, that you've been now equated to woman, which is supposed to be weak and detestable and such. And then you've got the other side of it, which is like, what are you talking about? Why are you even complaining? You just scored. And you get a very, from that other side, you get a um, different kind of situation when it comes to what society recognizes as women, like um, being sexually assaulted. Suddenly, all the men in their lives are like, "Holy shit, pitchforks and torches, and we need to protect our girls and all that," right?
Yeah.
So that's
It's
sort
actually
of
kind
what
of
I wanted
interesting
to
what
bring
you're
up.
saying because my focus isn't about like the emasculation aspect of it, although I understand like what you're saying. All the TV like moments that I remember from with that have to do with this topic are like it's a movie and a sexual act start and it's very clear that the guy is not into it. She's either old or ugly or he has a girlfriend or whatever. Then she starts performing on him, and then because it's a comedy they're just like, oh, that actually feels nice, and then they lie back and they fuck, right? And it's always like that, and it's kind of like, yes, I understand what you mean with like emasculation, but there's also for me a much sinister aspect of this, which is I think men are even less trained in being able to understand their own like lines and boundaries and like their ability to give consent. And like when a guy comes forward about being sexually assaulted, even if they're dismissed, for me that's still like a positive because I think a lot of men have been severely sexually assaulted and they don't even conceptualize that as that. They don't even realize what actually happened to them and the effect that it had on them, because men are not encouraged to think about it like that. You know, like, it was a shitty experience. Yeah, whatever. It was fine. I kind of wanted it anyway. And I think that's like a much bigger issue, because it's obviously not very good. So
Do we not think that women have also been socialized by so many different things? I'm not trying to make this about women, by the way, but I'm just trying to add some
we
context
think this
as
about
to
women too.
yeah, but like it's very interesting how society for so long has told women and men that intimacy is sex, right? And so a lot of people's understanding of being able to get intimacy is through like sex and sex related activities. And so I feel like there is this kind of phenomenon with women who maybe go about these sorts, engage in sexual assault, basically, through their socialization being told that that is intimacy and that that is what men want, like a kind of a misunderstanding of consent on their behalf as well, and it just ends up in these really problematic situations.
No, I
mean,
mean, I agree.
I think we need like education starting at like a much younger age about consent on all spectrums, because consent is not just a sexual thing. We need to like teach children how to have like agency and what it means for another person to consent in any sort of activity and what boundaries are. I mean, I didn't hear the word boundaries until I was probably like 16. That's pretty silly.
Yeah,
Oh, adding on to what Pixel said, actually when Zonia was talking, like, I kind of I disagreed with her that the real heart of the issue is the emasculation and the real issue is like the boundaries. And I understand that that is an issue, but I really don't feel like that gets at the heart of the issue. And I agree with Pixel that, like, for example, like, I know a lot of really religious women that were taught growing up that if your man wants to have sex with you, like, you do it. And there is no. And so I'm not pointing it out to be like, oh, woe is these women. Men don't experience this as well. But I'm just pointing out that there are parallels where, like, both there are groups of people in both genders that are like not taught boundaries. And I do think that a lot more men are not taught to say no at any point. Women are taught to say no to people because they're not good enough or because of all these other reasons. So they have some sense at some point that they are going to say no. But men are not taught this at any point by society. Like, they may decide this for themselves. They may come to this like, oh, she's not my type. Oh, she's too old. She's too, insert like sexist insult, like whatever. But like, they don't really decide for themselves outside of status or something like that they shouldn't want sex, and that even if they do have sex with like a partner that they have that they love, they don't have like their own sense of boundaries of like, okay, like when is this no longer okay?
Yeah, we can just think about like yeah, something.
Oh, I was going to clarify my position. Like, I don't think that the emasculation is the problem, but at the same time, I don't think boundaries is necessarily the problem either. I think it's sort of multifaceted. Like in this case, the young man was sexually assaulted when he was passed out. And that was like the main sexual assault, right? He was completely passed out and vulnerable and then was sexually assaulted. So I think that even if we were to solve the boundaries problem and have sex education, you're still going to have sexual assaults perpetrated by some people. Some people will have a predatory approach and some people will have more of an ignorant approach, right? So boundaries can't just be the issue. And the reason why I was talking about the emasculation is I talk about that as sort of a preventative or a barrier to a lot of men and masculine people coming forward about their sexual assaults, as well as sort of addressing the issues of sexual assault. And like the Me Too movement has included some men in it, and I think that's a really good thing. And even though more often than not it's feminine people being sexually assaulted, I think that a lot of this issue gets swept under the rug and overlooked more so than it does for women with men because of these barriers, these social barriers based around, you know, being seen as being weak, being seen as being feminine or not masculine enough, etc. And
See,
that
but
was
I think, and I don't
why
want
I
to
brought
speak
that
for
up.
Lana, so I'll speak for myself. Maybe I'm being like kind of triggered because when we do like this comparison, we're like coming out about sexual assault or like men discussing the topic, it's them like expressing a type of femininity. I guess I take like personal offense to that, and maybe that's like
And I
just an
agree with you,
emotional
by the
I
way.
think
reaction
what
I
she's
have
saying
to.
is that it's
I totally
bad,
agree
if
with
that's the
you, by
case.
the
No,
way.
no, no. I
Yes.
have no doubt that it's bad, right? I'm just like owning up to maybe how my
Yeah.
opinion is more like emotional than anything else. But I again, and this is why I said that I agreed with Lana about it not being the main issue. I think that sure, the treatment of men after they come out with sexual assault allegations or just talking about, hey, my girlfriend made me uncomfortable last night. Sure, they'll be called like a pussy. It's like just fuck your girlfriend. It's fine. Like, what's wrong with you? And I agree that's a huge problem.
Yeah.
But maybe I'm just repeating myself. I think men are like I am blessed that I have men in my life who have come to me and talked to me about the sexual assaults that they have been through. And I was very surprised that they were capable of like understanding that that's what happened, because I've talked to a lot of men that told me a lot of very disturbing situations that they couldn't even label as what they were, that they didn't even understand that what they went through was a negative experience. And I get that there's kind of like an issue labeling other people's experiences as negative, but from the story I heard, clearly there was discomfort. Clearly there was like a lack of ability to establish like a boundary. And I think that's what maybe some of us are talking about when we're saying boundary and consent are the issue. But I agree, Zania, it's multifaceted. Everything is,
So
right?
I want to hear from April,
like a
and
difficult
then
question.
also Zealous, because I think we've solved the issue. So April first.
Okay, I want to ask like a difficult question to the panel, and that's how this intersects with relationships and how boundaries change if you're in a relationship. Like, I think the example given earlier was if you're in a relationship and like you grab your partner's butt or whatever, is that going to be considered different than if you grab someone on like the street's butt? Obviously. And so, how do you think that these, these kind of established norms can change what is considered or not considered sexual assault?
I think you have to understand that in relationships, you're going to get it wrong sometimes, right? Because that's what boundaries are. They're not just something that you set hard and fast and then it's done, right? Like occasionally in a relationship, there is a very good chance if you're with somebody for a decent amount of time, you're absolutely going to cross a boundary. And you're going to have to be able to talk about those things. And I think in this particular situation, that's where it kind of gets a little bit interesting. Because I just can't even imagine being a teenager and trying to navigate these things, and then especially navigating them in front of a public audience, right? Because teenagers are going to get so much shit wrong. Like, I absolutely got shit wrong as a teenager. I'm sure we all have. And I would like to think that I had always respected people's consent, but I am sure that there are times when I like would have gone in for a cuddle with an ex-boyfriend and he would have been like, I'm not in the mood, and I would have been like, ah, because like for me as a woman, I would have been like, okay, well, you don't love me anymore, like at that age, right? And it's a really uncomfortable thing to kind of talk about and navigate because you're gonna get it wrong. So I do think that there is a line there. I just don't know where it is.
I was literally going to give that example before Zonia like clarified her position earlier. That's like how many of us were like trying to start something up with like a guy or a boyfriend or whatever, and then they weren't in the mood or they're sad, and then kind of like hurts your ego a little bit, and it's like it shows the entitlement that we have as well. That's like it's expected that the guy needs to be up for it at any time, even if they're a partner. But I completely agree with you, Pixel, that there's when I sexually engage with people, it's not necessarily relationships, but if it's someone that I do things with over a period of time, guys at these spaces at least they say very correct things. So they're like, tell me, I never want to make you uncomfortable, blah 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 blah. And I'm like, look, I have a very complex trauma history sometimes, will be doing stuff and I will feel uncomfortable. I can't promise you that that won't happen. I literally can't manufacture it. All I want to know is that we have the ground that when that happens, we can like repair that. So it's not about like stopping discomfort and making sure it never happens and never crossing boundaries. Boundaries would get crossed. Boundaries are malleable. Boundaries change in the situation. It's about like having the foundation with this person to be able to discuss it. So in the same way that you can be with a partner and usually they grab your ass and everything's fine. Like there was a period of time when I was with my ex when I was just like, hey, I know we've been doing this till now, but it's like, I don't want you to touch my ass anymore. Like I don't feel like it anymore, you know? And maybe in the future it changed, you know? And that's like reestablishing boundaries. But I do like, about the specific case that was the prompt, I think that in that situation, and this might be the hot take, I think she was very confused about what they actually were. So I don't want to excuse the negative behavior, and I don't think it was okay. I just read her statement and I found it reasonable. I think you can absolutely infringe and hurt someone without intending to, and that was kind of like the difference when Zonia said like the difference between ignorant and like abusive predatory behavior. I can't necessarily label her as predatory, but I don't think you need to be predatory to do a lot of damage to another individual. And there's also the aspect of like him being unconscious, and like instead of that, maybe let's just like ask ourselves, like when you're in a relationship, did you ever ask your partner if you can like touch their dick when they're asleep and see how they feel about it, or is that something that we just do because we think it would be okay? I think a lot of women do that.
The important thing is like negotiating these boundaries in an environment that's very like low heated, right? Because like if you're having sex with someone, sometimes you can like push the boundaries a lot with that person in the moment, just because it's very difficult to like say no in the moment. And I've personally been in cases, in scenarios where I've like said no, I don't want to do something, and then it's come to like we're actually having sex and they ask again, and I have a hard time saying no in that case. So I think when it comes to like negotiating these, so much of it is like making sure that you're negotiating them in a place where they feel really comfortable saying no. And when it comes to like touching someone while they're sleeping, that's like really sketchy, because obviously like they can't really stop you if they decide that that's like not comfortable, something they're comfortable with that particular time. So I think that kind of thing is something that if your partner is going to allow or not allow you to do that, you have to really be very cautious when you are negotiating that. And it seems like a particularly easy case to get things wrong and to cross boundaries that shouldn't be crossed.
I want to let Zealous in. I hadn't had a chance to speak at all. Zealous, I said really nice things about you before, but I'm really glad you're here. I'm glad you're able to join us. So Zealous, please post your initial thoughts.
So my initial thoughts on the allegations and everything. So from what I could read, to me it seemed like Jack made continuous efforts to set boundaries that were broken, and I just wanted to say that you don't feel like it's predatory because, you know, the boundaries in a relationship and things of that nature can be so nuanced. But I think in this case specifically, there were boundaries that were set, and he let her know that she had made him uncomfortable and that she was doing things that weren't okay, and she didn't stop. And so I feel like
Would you like me to clarify? We can't hear you very well right now.
Yeah, I'm not sure if you're talking.
Can you hear me? Oh, you can't hear me?
No, yeah, now we can hear you.
Yeah.
You've
Try it again.
cutting out.
Yeah, you might have been
Sorry.
cutting out a little bit, but keep going.
No, so I was just saying that sexual boundaries in a relationship, if there hasn't been like a conversation that has happened, it's kind of like something you kind of play by ear in a sense, like you don't want you're not purposefully like generally, not to the specifics of the prompt and the situation itself, but in general, boundaries and things like that, if there hasn't been a direct conversation, it's kind of nuanced, and it kind of, you play it as you go. But in the context of this, I feel that there were boundaries that were set that were purposefully broken, and in my opinion, she was acting predatory. And I think she was taking advantage of the fact that he is a man, and there are like societal expectations of men to always be in the mood, or always like not want to turn down sex, especially if they have a prior sexual relationship, which I think is wrong. So that's essentially what to say.
When I would talk about predatory, not predatory, the only thing I mean by that is if the person is intending and are very much are purposefully callous of the other person's needs, or like they're actively ignoring them. And maybe that's a silly
I'll
interpretation.
fucking hard disagree with this. I'm sorry, I
Then
can't.
let's talk about it.
No, that I can't. I can't get behind that at all. I honestly think that like intent basically doesn't matter. Like
I agree with you that intent doesn't matter. That's why the word predatory is stupid to use. I just find it completely useless. I think when we try to label someone as like, oh, I get using words like predatory and abusive and stuff like that to conceptualize your own experience and what you've been through. That's fine. But because I think intent doesn't matter, I think someone can hurt you severely and meaningfully and never intending to do that. And that was kind of going to be my argument, that I think for her, and I can't speak for her again because I'm not in her brain, but I think her case is a good example to how women are so socialized to not even consider that the guy, like, we understand that even if you have an explicit conversation about something, if you feel like the dynamic changes in the moment, like playing it by ear, you might recontextualize that conversation. And I don't know if that's what happened with them, but it's like a broader topic of women are not realizing, or we're not taught in any way, that there's another party that might have needs and boundaries that they need to pay attention to. Because in the media and right now with like feminist movements, we're talking about listen to yourself, understand your boundaries, give consent. But it's like it's two people, and the guy needs to be able, guy or girl, whatever, they need to be able to do that too. So in the same way that men are expected or are educated today to be attentive to the woman and make sure that she's okay, and enthusiastic consent and all that crap, it needs to go the other way around. And I think women are very bad at realizing that they're not paying enough attention to what's going on with the guy as well. And that's why I said at the beginning, it's also really hard to do because guys are not attentive to themselves even more than women. So like you'll ask him, hey, are you okay? And they'll say yes no matter what. Like they're not even asking themselves that, right? So it's a problem. It's a real problem. But we can talk about predatory if you want.
Yeah, the way in which like the being predatory versus being ignorant matters is stopping that further abuse. And regardless of what it is, regardless of the intent, it is abuse. It is abuse. It is sexual assault. The damage on the person is going to be the same whether or not they're ignorant or they're being predatory. But if somebody's ignorant,
100%.
I personally would not give this individual the benefit of that doubt, and I know that might be stepping too far into facts that I don't have like concretely, but oh man, I lost my train of thought.
She's predatory.
Yeah, I mean, I think she's predatory, but if she is ignorant, I mean, she's truly ignorant, or maybe she's just like, almost like in the middle, like, almost willfully ignorant, that's a possibility as well. She could be educated, and that's important to note, but other than that,
So,
like, the
Pixel and Zonia brought
consequences...
this up at the beginning. Like, the internet is really weird, and this might be a me thing. I have very little interest with online stuff, so relationships that I have no actual like personal experience with. I don't care about the intention of a person. I care about the harm that was done to a different person. I care about the person who went through something negative, that has been traumatized or hurt or abused or being predated against, but I have zero interest in labeling that other person anything, because I can't talk about their state of mind. I can say, you hurt this individual, but I don't give a fuck why. It doesn't really matter to me. I can't take you to court for it. I'm not going to put you in jail. I might have my own personal opinions about what you did, but I think, like, I don't think realizing if she's just ignorant or predatory is the issue. I think whether she's predatory or ignorant, she did things that really hurt this guy, either because she was confused or because she didn't give a fuck. But it's like, I can't, like, I'm not her mom. I can't go and lecture her for being a callous bitch, right? So I more have an interest in, like, finding out why people have those situations. How can women end up really hurting men without even realizing it? Because I think we all agree that women hurt men sexually all the time, and most of them are not predatory. Or is that a hot take?
I don't think that's a hot take. I think that's true, like, in general, yeah.
I know for me, the only reason why I intentionally brought up the difference between a predatory act versus one out of ignorance is mainly to address the boundaries thing, and that if we lean too hard on, oh, we need to be doing more to teach young people how to establish boundaries, even though I think that's a good thing, I don't think it solves the problem every time, right? Because you can have you can have both a combination of being negligent of boundaries as well as someone being predatory who doesn't even care about boundaries. And that's the only time that I really felt that it mattered to define the difference. I think in what we're talking about here, we would talk more about sort of a holistic approach to how do we address these kinds of issues. You have, in the case of Jack, his perspective from what he was saying is that he was continuously establishing boundaries, and like more and more so as their friendship went on. And those boundaries were not being respected by his friend, Sienna, right? And so if his friend isn't respecting those boundaries, then boundaries are not the answer there. So something else needs to be the case. And I think kind of like what you're hitting on, Katie, is sort of this, in a way, being socialized to not take men's boundaries as seriously as men are socialized to, well, trying to be socialized to take women's. But there's definitely more emphasis coming from that direction than the other right now. So, yeah.
I have a question for the panel. Oh, go, Zealous.
Okay. All I wanted to say was that I understand why you would want to say that intent doesn't really matter, because the effects of what happened are still there. Like, the person was still hurt. But I do think that intent is always important when we're looking at things in general, because like that's how we handle things in the justice system. Like intent is a part of how we sentence, so I do think intent is important. And you don't have to be in someone's head to be able to recognize intent. I think you can just look at the details and be able to recognize, like, and what's the word, kind of like speculate about like what the person's intent was. Because in the context of this, I feel that the fact that there were boundaries placed that were deliberately ignored, that speaks to intent. And that's why I think, like, if if you accidentally violate somebody's boundaries, it's not the same as when you intentfully violate somebody's boundaries. And I feel like
And
that is something.
how do you distinguish that between
Uh,
accidentally and deliberately? In her
well, if
situation,
there are
like specific.
boundaries, no, hold on. In her situation, I'll answer that. In her situation, you can't accidentally violate somebody's boundaries when they have time and time again reiterated their boundaries and try to reestablish them multiple times over, and you continue to disregard them. So, like, in that, you would say, like, you can speculate that her intent was not to respect his boundaries, and it was to, like she intentfully disregarded them, because it's one thing to have a boundary set once or maybe even twice, but if it's continuous, then it speaks to how you don't care about their boundaries and you're purposefully violating them.
So I agree with you that intent is important and the justice system works this way. My main argument was that I'm not the justice system, especially not with online relationships that I know very little about. And maybe what you're saying, all of that is true. The thing is, it doesn't matter to me personally in the sense that I I can't be in someone's head. My entire argument is that it's very possible. So I could have an explicit conversation with someone that I tell them, please don't text me on Tuesday. But we also have a friendship and they have a personal crisis on Tuesday and they hit me up on Tuesday and they're like, oh my God, I really need you. So at that moment, they are crossing a boundary. Are they intentfully crossing a boundary? Is it a problem if they do in that situation? I mean, we can deliberate all of that. I'm just saying, I don't mind other people seeking out intent. I have little like personal interest in that because to distinguish between being even willfully ignorant and maliciously predating on someone, there's a massive difference, and I can't be in someone's head to make that difference. So I don't care about labeling that as much. And I'm going to tell you why I think it's not as important to me. Most people aren't predators. Everyone can engage in predatory behavior, for sure, but I think most people don't set out to harm other people. I think it's way more likely that someone is just ignorant about social cues, willfully ignorant because they want to fuck someone, so they're being more pushy than they should be. All of these things, then they're actively seeking out to harm the person that they're engaging with. So from that mindset, I don't really, I assume I have, what's it called? Like goodwill, as in like, Harvey Weinstein is a great example to how I have no problem with understanding that there was intent, okay? Or you can make that argument that you can't know what he was thinking and maybe he didn't really understand what was wrong with his actions. And I would argue that at some point with such repetitive behavior and such, it doesn't really matter at that point because the harm is so severe and so magnified. I don't think it matters too much.
So Zealous, you can respond. Then I want to hear from Pixel, who had a question for the panel. Yeah.
So I totally understand what you're saying. For me, I just think that I feel like if the genders were reversed, there wouldn't be, I don't know, like, feel like space to like want to do without the intent or act as if like
I think that's bad.
Yeah, there should be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think
so
the question is like, no, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, finish your
No,
point.
go ahead. No, go ahead. Well, no, I just wanted to say that like I feel like the reason there's so much wiggle room in this and like you don't want to assume, I feel like you would be quicker to assume if the genders were reversed.
No, my argument is that I wouldn't. I do the same with guys, right? So I think a lot of people on this panel would be a lot quicker to assume, which I don't think you were here for my opening statement. but I think we do that with men as well. And when I talk to women and we talk about like experiences they have, I've talked to Shay extensively about my own sexual experiences. And she was like, well, you were definitely infringed upon, like your boundaries were definitely being crossed. Like this doesn't sound consensual and stuff like that. And I go, yeah, it was a tough experience for me. I have very little interest in now trying to figure out if this person actually tried to hurt me or they were just kind of dumb or callous or whatever. It doesn't, it's just not really important to me.
So
think the thing
let's
is that,
try
like-
Pixel, and then yeah.
So my question is actually kind of relevant to all of this. I wanted to ask the panel how we feel about this playing out in the public sphere with these kids who were minors at the time, in the way it is. Because I don't know about all of you, but my experiences as a young woman, men got it wrong all the time, right? And there were definitely times when like my boundaries were certainly crossed, and there's probably times when I crossed certain boundaries. But now as I'm a little bit older, I can't imagine what that would have been like, especially having like viral people commenting on these sorts of experiences. So I'm just actually really curious as to how everybody feels about this playing out in the public sphere, right? Having had this experience be when these people were very, very young.
We're all here. We're all on Twitch, right? So I think everyone has some experience with being in the public sphere, just a little bit. And I think that with that experience comes like the universal experience of being like misunderstood, and or people just like reading things into your personal life that are totally non-existent. And so I think sometimes when we start talking about intention and trying to get into people's heads and understand like how good or bad of a person, this person is based on outside knowledge, I think that's just like, it's so dangerous and it's so disastrous. And I think we see it like all the time with like much less clear-cut cases. Not to say this case is totally clear-cut, because again, we are still on the outside. But with especially more ambiguous things, people will just read in whatever they want to believe. If they want to hate the person, they'll find a reason to hate them. And I think that the question of like intent and whether or not someone's a predator, that's the kind of thing that like is good for the justice system. The justice system needs to figure that out so they can like figure out what needs to happen to a person. But from the outside, I think our responsibility is really to use cases like this to have conversations about consent in general and consent in society, and maybe worry a little bit less about like the specific drama of this case and trying to really get into the specific head of this person, because that's just so difficult to do.
I think a personal, yeah.
On a personal level, I will almost always like automatically read into these things. Like
Very
the
easy to
tone
do.
of her, the tone of her apology statement. Yeah, that definitely like gave me some hints as to her character, that the tone with which things were said between the two of them. But you do bring up a good point about maybe that's not great to share publicly, because it does contribute, especially if you've got like a following. That definitely does contribute to a lot of like mob justice type mentalities.
A personal frustration that I have with online is that I guess it's content, or I guess it's just like human nature clicking with whatever the internet is. It's a lot more interesting to try to figure this person out and listen to the tone of their apology and try to understand what they did and what they didn't do. I watched this really interesting video. I'll see if I can find it and link it. It talked about how like a woman in Australia was literally convicted for murdering her own baby, because public opinion, basically, when she was on the steps like 6 months later and talking about her baby, she was slightly apathetic. So the public turned on her and they thought that's not how a grieving mother looks. So she got convicted for murdering her own child. It's the dingo ate my baby meme. That's a real story. It was her baby. So it's kind of like, me personally, I don't think I need to figure out how intentful and how predatory and how incredibly bad this girl was to care a lot about the experience this guy went through. And I think there's a lot more good to be had there. But I think it's just internet nature that I'm never going to understand. So maybe that's just like a personal defect of mine.
This
I
is
don't
like
know.
I feel like we're getting like off topic, but do you not find it helpful in your personal life? Because human beings, like the advantage we have over computers is we're very good at pattern recognition. That's what we do. Do you not find it like helpful in your personal life
No,
that
we're
when
not
you
good at
In
it.
my
We
personal
think we're
life,
good
yeah,
at it.
for sure. Like, if I want to find out the intention of someone that I know personally, in regards to a situation that I know happened personally, I think that I'm like really equipped to do that. It's only when it gets to like people who I have no like conception of who they are as a person, right? I haven't consumed these people's content until today. And even if I did, that's a very one-sided relationship. So I think that like trying to figure out people who you don't know is really when it gets dangerous. And we're very good at figuring out stuff in our own life. Hopefully, even then, like we can get things wrong. And it's an entirely different ballgame when it comes to people on the internet. Which is why I
terms
think
of-
it's like a little bit dangerous to try to speculate about intention of this specific person or not. But in general, I would say personally that intention does matter when it comes to trying to understand like whether or not a specific person is predatory. And that's, like we said, important for the justice system to figure out and so on.
In
I think
terms
it's
of me, Cyrus, personally, in my personal life, I'm not like April. I do have a hard time maybe realizing when someone is hurting me in a way that isn't excusable. I'm not that good at it. So what I do is I think, how does interacting with this person feels? How many times do I end up feeling sad or hurt? How much I've communicated what I need and what I want, and has there been improvement? And if there hasn't, I don't think this person doesn't care about me, or this person is an abuser, or they have narcissism, or whatever. I just think something here isn't clicking, and I just need to remove myself because maybe it's me, maybe it's them, but this is not good for me. So I don't need to assign blame to anyone else to realize that a dynamic isn't good for me. Now, that would be very different in like extremely abusive relationships because your ability to like gather yourself and walk away is like incredibly hindered. But I think the internet has primed a lot of people to think that a lot of their relationships is a lot more abusive than what they actually are. And it's just called human relations being complex. And sometimes things are going to happen that you're not gonna like, and that's going to suck.
I haven't read this book yet. I need to. It's called Conflict is Not Abuse. And it's all about
Sounds
that.
like a good title.
I've been screaming about this stuff to myself, alone, to my computer, for years about how people are just taking these words, abuse and narcissism and whatever else, and abusing the hell out of them, ironically.
Yeah.
I think it's really interesting watching these things play out online, and kind of, Katie, what you said before, how you can't actually understand the internet, you can. And because I know that there are people on this panel who have had experience with this as well, where very much on the internet, people are going to virtue signal. Whatever the situation is, whoever is experiencing the canceling or whatever, people will jump on it if they feel like they are on the right side of the conversation with the information that they have. Whether the victim is a woman or a man, most of the time, the majority of the internet will be jumping on the side of the optics of what makes them look like a good person for supporting that. So that's where so much of the nuance gets lost in these online conversations, because people are engaging them in them with their own intention about how they will be perceived for either supporting this person or denouncing this person.
Yeah.
So you can understand people's intentions.
I think what I meant by I don't understand the internet, I think I understand what happens pretty well and why people do it. When I said I don't understand it, I mean, I don't think I get a kick out of it like other people seem to. Because I don't think random mobs on Twitter are like fucking Bosch or Destiny with like huge crowds following them, right? So I think, and I always look at things from like a psychological perspective, and it's just how I look at things. I think people are very, when things like this come up in the online sphere, you engage, you're now faced with a situation, and you're going to project all of your experiences onto it. And a lot of people have been hurt, and a lot of people have been abused, and a lot of people have grievances with personal people in their lives, and they can't solve that. So if there's a situation that they can like project that onto and like lay into this imaginary abusive person instead of like figuring out their own shit with their own abusive person, then that's a lot easier. And I'm not saying it's necessarily like a bad thing. I just have no interest in it personally.
I want to, Cyrus, I think you want to talk. And there's some people who haven't had much chance to jump in. Shay, Lana, want to make sure you guys have a space. Okay.
Oh, it was just like regarding what Pixel Smixel was saying about the way that people want a virtue signal, and it's specifically that they want a virtue signal to their in-group, to the people that they follow, the people that they know they already mostly agree with. That's kind of what they're looking for. I think it's a combination, though, as well, of like people having real emotional issues, and those are probably like the loudest people, is the virtue signalers and the people with real trauma or issues that they're projecting onto this situation.
Shay, do you have anything to add? Then Lana?
Yeah, I think a lot of this really, because especially going to the question to the panel, kind of like how it affects you when you're so young, I think it actually really starts so young. And a lot of us have kind of talked about that, how as young boys, they're sort of not only taught, but incentivized, really, to sort of not really create those boundaries. And I think it's done in a couple different ways. Like, there was a quote that I heard a while, and I can't remember where I heard it from, but they said that as a society, we see that sex is something that is done to women, not something that women do. And I think that's a really interesting concept, really. And then it compounds on other issues like certain myths, I guess, like that I would assume, I guess, are myths where men are horny 24/7 and you know, it's your job to say no. Like, I'm sure a lot of women
Not
have
all
probably...
men.
Oh, yeah. Every single one of them, obviously. No.
So
but
if you're depressed.
No, and I think we really see how this plays out differently because just a couple days ago, I saw a video from D'Angelo Wallace. He was doing just an analysis of Shallon Lester, who is a woman who pretty much, she literally says, yeah, oh God, I'm a predator. She says her vice is younger men. I think there's an actual text where she's commenting and saying she has to wait until she has to wait a year for someone to turn 18. And you compare someone like that who still hasn't really been deplatformed all that much to someone like Mezion, you know what I mean? A lot, and you could still argue that he might have a fan base, but there's an entire documentary, you know, going over how his behavior was problematic. And I also think it's really interesting because when you consider it, the media I've consumed, at least outside of like Law and Order, very rarely shows men being sexually abused. And I think that's such an interesting concept, kind of adding to, we are taught this. And as we grow up, if we aren't really educated, which is why I do not to bring it back to boundaries, but that's sort of why I feel like it is important, because I feel like a lot of people out here, even Sienna, might not have recognized within herself that the fact that he said no meant no because, well, he's a man. They want it all the time. And that's not to say her frame of reference or to even say that that's okay. And even like that goes to what Katie said as well. I doubt he even might have recognized in that moment, like, I'm being assaulted and I need to find someone to help me. You know what I mean? Like,
Also,
difficult.
I want to like say that like the only times you do hear about men being sexually assaulted in a way that isn't made for laughs or for dismissal is when you talk about children. You never hear about adult men talking about their adult experiences where women have violated their consent, or not very often at all, and that's a huge problem. It's really bad.
I
Even with teenage boys, right, and older teenage boys, it's equally downplayed or just completely ignored.
Is so it's a story, and I want to go to Lana next after this. It's a story I brought up. Actually, might have been on a past Lily. But where I was in college, and there was this woman, I guess, that I would hang out with. She was cool. She was in the anime. Loved it, you know. And we lived on a co-ed dorm. And you know, so yeah, I just had to walk down the hallway, and that's where she was at. So I go over to her spot, and I'm sitting on her bed, and we're just talking about something, all right, something random, and this woman literally jumps me. she jumps me. She like grabs onto me and starts like kissing all over me, right? And I don't know what to do, and like we like fall to the floor. And I'm just like laughing because I don't know what's happening, and I don't know how to react to it. And I get up, or at least I try to get up because this woman is freaking strong. She's got a hold on me, right? And I try to like drag myself. I'm like, hey, you know what? Like I'm not sure if I even vocalized anything to her. I think I was just laughing as the whole thing happened. And eventually I got free and I ran away, laughing about it the whole time. But you know, just play it back with the gender switched, and like like it becomes like a funny story to like really disturbing. And I don't know. I don't conceptualize it as like I was assaulted or anything like that. You know, which I thought
I
was
think the way
interesting.
you delivered
Katie,
it.
I was
No,
gonna say, I think it was interesting the way you said earlier, Katie. You know, about like not putting like a negative spin on someone else's story, right? Because I mean, I think it like by the books, like it's kind of like an assault there. But to me, it was just a weird thing that happened. It's just I moved on. But yeah,
yeah, I think the way you tell it is very like revealing, right? Because when you said I couldn't even get up because she was so strong, and you're laughing right now, I giggled, and then I looked at everyone else, and everyone else were being very serious. And I think like even the delivery of that story is like meant to play it off, and it creates like this atmosphere that like people around you hearing to this story need to understand that it's not a big deal, it's not an issue. And I think it was like a live example to that. But like, you know, Prime, we talked about my experiences. Like a lot of people like to label my experiences as like abusive or rape or whatever, and I don't conceptualize them that way. I think like this is kind of like a tangent, but it's something that's important for me to say. I think anyone can label their experiences whatever they find helpful. I think it's incredibly problematic to label other people's experiences as negative, especially when they come with like the oomph of what it would mean to like reconcile with yourself that you were sexually assaulted and violated that way. But I do think I would hope that you would have the space, like in the future, if you wanted to like re-examine that experiences, that experience. I'm not saying like get traumatized by it, but maybe in 5 years from now, you'll be able to look in that story, and next time you tell it would be like, so this thing happened to me, and it was not okay, and I hope no guy has to go through that. I was so uncomfortable. I was just laughing the entire time, and I think that would show progress in the world, not in you.
I don't know. I think we have to be really careful because, like, I have also been in experiences where in the moment, like, I wasn't really terribly upset about them. But looking back, like, they very obviously fall into, like, a technical definition of assault. And
Yeah.
I think that, like, sometimes people can analyze, they can look back at their experiences, and that can be a really healthy process that allows them to heal and to grow and to come to better understandings about what kind of behavior is and isn't appropriate. but I also worry that sometimes people can like cause themselves to feel pain that they wouldn't necessarily otherwise. And like in my personal experiences, and I can't speak to what Prime has experienced, but like I think that there are people who have told me like that's really bad, like you should be like very upset about this, and like they just didn't really upset me in the moment, and I'm not like traumatized afterwards, and I refuse to like traumatize myself looking back or like characterize myself as a victim in this case, because I think that like a lot of these circumstances are just like so complicated, and even if something is like technically it technically might like be considered assault, if you personally are not like suffering as a result of that, I think it's okay to like allow yourself to not be like horribly bothered, and to not
I'd like
like
to challenge you.
re-traumatize yourself. Yeah, please.
So first of all, I agree with you, and that was you said what I said basically. I don't think people should traumatize or re-traumatize themselves just so society would be fine with the label they put on an experience they have. I think that's really crappy. I think people can hear Prime's case and be like, that's a great like example of assault without needing Prime to break down in tears and cry about an experience, right? Both things can exist at the same time. What I talked to Shay about this like a few weeks ago, and she said something similar to what you said. So I want to ask you what I asked her. So if women very consistently infringe on boundaries with guys, not in relationships, just like in the world, women are much more okay to like put hands on and stuff like that. Stuff that we would tell guys, hey, don't fuck a waste of a, like, don't touch the waist of a woman you don't know without like making sure it's okay. You can't just put hands on. And I know that like I touch men all the time. It's because it's more socialized that it will be okay and they'll be okay with it. So if someone infringed on your boundaries, if there was a violation of consent or implied consent, but it didn't bother you, what does that mean? Does that approve what happened?
I would say like in that circumstance, no harm is done. And that doesn't necessarily mean that as a rule, that kind of behavior is good or acceptable. So I think we can like sometimes actions won't have a particular harm come of them just because of the circumstances in which they happen. But that doesn't necessarily mean the action itself is something that people are okay to push the boundaries with, just because they can be like so bad when they do go bad. Like I'm thinking about my personal experiences, and when I've like told people like, no, I don't want to do this, and we've ended up, doing that anyways. In my case, like I don't feel particularly traumatized, but I would never tell anyone that like, yeah, it's okay that to like sometimes have sex with someone, even if they say no, just because like I personally wasn't particularly bothered by it in one specific case. I think that would be like incredibly dangerous to do. So I think that I would say in my case, like harm didn't happen, but the action itself is something that we should be like very quick to point out as like something that you should not engage in, because so often harm does come of that kind of thing.
Yeah, I was gonna say that.
I do want to hear from Lana. I haven't got a chance to throw it to her, but then after that, everyone else, please.
So I think it's really interesting. So I feel like I've experienced a lot of different things that on different levels I would or wouldn't consider like sexual assault, and other people might like disagree with like what it technically was or whatever. And like some of the experiences, like for me it's like, was it traumatizing? Like not was it technically sexual assault, right? And not everything that's actually sexual assault is traumatizing. And like, but that like you can't tell people like, hey, like you can do things that are technically sexual assault and like people are going to be okay with it, because it's just like not helpful, because some people can't read cues or like aren't actually in relationships where they like know the person really well and they talk about those things and they go through it. And for me, right, so getting back I guess a little bit to the specific situation, I know Kate you didn't really want to comment on this specifically, but I think it's really odd. So like I didn't read too much about the situation, I don't know too much about it. I like read the like the article a little bit, but from my understanding about what Zonia said is that like he was asleep, like he was unconscious, and like to me there are certain things that are just way past the line that like those should basically never be okay unless you talk about them first. And to me, if a man did that on Twitch, we would all instantly call him a rapist, right? Like I think that's pretty like black and white, to be honest. But I understand like fair enough, but but I think for a lot of people that would be pretty black and white. So I did want to point out that although I understand like you may hold that standard that for anyone like online you basically don't want to comment on like basically like labeling people or you know doing that, but I do want to point out that I feel that if it were a man in this situation, it would be a little bit easier of a judgment for a lot of people, not necessarily you. And I also want to point out that while I think these situations are like really complex and like, you know, consent is very like different between people, to be completely honest, I've like read a lot about like different theories of consent and like how to like apply them, and everyone has like a different preference. Like some people are like really into enthusiastic consent, some people are into like the concept of like respecting the person and kind of like knowing them and like going with what you think that they would want. Some people want like, you know, only if there's a no. Some people want you have to have a yes, and those are like they look completely different, right? So it's really hard, but I do want to point out that like the gender thing to me feels like it for a lot of people they would feel differently about this situation, like if
the reason why I feel comfortable saying what I am saying about this specific case is because I haven't watched the video, and maybe the video will change my mind, but I watched Jack's video of talking about the allegations, and I read not the shitty apology video that she made like when it first came out, but a statement that she released like a few weeks ago. And from what I read, because I looked a little bit into it, her perspective, and people could say that she's lying, and I have no way of proving that she isn't, and I'm not going to die on that hill, so I don't give a fuck. But if I choose to not assume that she's lying, it seems that this girl was incredibly confused about the status of their
Why would you listen to her? Like, if somebody gets assaulted, like, why would you automatically, like, listen to the rapist? Like, or the person being accused? Like, that never occurs to me, ever. Like, usually, in my experience, right, when someone, like, is accusing someone else of sexual assault, my first thing is, okay, this person was hurt. You know, like validate their feelings and like give them comfort and like make them feel better. And like if for some reason you have to prove it, right, like because you're going to court or because you know there's some sort of consequence you're trying to give the person who's been like perpetrated against, right, like you basically collect evidence to understand like did this reasonably happen, like what were the other things. And like honestly, like I didn't read all the information, but like in my experience, like if there's something sexual that happens between two people, and this is totally an anecdote and like from my own like personal assault experiences, when two people have some sort of like sexual experience and it doesn't go well, if they actually care about that other person, they'll kind of like apologize, like try to fix it, move on, right? But like what actually like in my experience, like I had an interaction with someone I was dating a long time ago, and it was like vaguely non-consensual, and I like brought it up. I was very upset about it, and he like apologized, and like he actually made me feel like he regretted it, right? Like I knew that it was like actually an accident, and I felt better about it, and like I would never consider that assault. Because like I know that like.
So don't you think that if she were to talk to him, and if he were to accept her version that when she infringed on his boundaries, she did not understand his boundaries to be what they were, and she was confused about the status of their relationship, don't you think that would recontextualize the experience for them? I'm not saying that's what happened. I'm saying I read her statement, and I don't think I would read a rapist statement. If they raped someone, their statement is not going to change what they did. I'm not worried about listening to guilty people's like their pleads, because at the end of the day, if they did something that is objectively bad and they are 100% in the wrong, then it will be clear no matter how they spin it, unless they're lying, right? But the thing is, most relationships, it's not going to be only one person did a thing that was horribly bad. And that's why I read her statement, because it mattered to me what led this person to do these things, because from what he was talking about, it was extremely clear he was very disinterested. And from her statement, it seems like that she was very much confused about the status of their relationships and how he feels about her, which makes me understand how she could be very unclear on boundaries.
That
even
doesn't
though they were
justify
properly-
anything while you're asleep, though. Like
No,
from my
that doesn't
understanding,
justify it.
what
That
like
doesn't justify it.
that's like a hard line. Like, I don't know about anyone else. I feel like that's kind of a hard line.
I'm
for
sorry. I'm not
me-
saying that justifies it. The whole Jack thing, he elaborated a lot more things than just him being unconscious.
But-
there are more videos, there are more instances. He talked about her topping him naked in the middle when they were just hanging out. There's a whole story there. I don't know how much you read. It's a saga that lasts like a year. It's a lot more
I think we're burying the lead
And
though.
there's also-
But like we're burying the lead, and I want to hear from you as well, Zonia. But like Lana, you said like, why would you never listen to the person who was assaulted, or sorry, did the supposedly did the assaulting, right? But that's what we do within, like, for instance, the justice system, right? But even just when we're trying to figure out as third-party observers to any situation, we have to like listen to the other side. Doesn't mean we necessarily believe them or anyone, right? But just we'd have to go to them and hear their side of the story, right? It could be a misunderstanding, right? Like maybe if you heard the two sides, you realize, okay, this is where things are going wrong. But to say that you're not going to listen at all, like that seems like a problem, right?
Not that
I
you
agree
don't
with that.
do it at all, but I don't know. Maybe I'm misinterpreting like how much Kate read on both sides.
I have, but I want to clarify.
Read
Okay.
everything. I mean, if you
I'm so
can.
sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah. Be
So-
very quick. We have very little time. I want to hear from other people.
The unconscious thing is 100% not okay. I have zero justification for that. The only reason why that's not my main focus is because I'm thinking if she thought they were basically a couple, the amount of girls who have touched their boyfriends when they're asleep because they thought their boyfriend was okay with it is astounding. And I think that there needs to be a conversation about that if I'm going to now call that sexual assault when she thinks they're in a relationship.
Zonia.
That's all there is to it.
I know for me, what I did was I was listening not just to Jack and Sienna, but also to the friends of like their friend group. And so there were videos posted by multiple friends. There's one in particular who had witnessed multiple incidents and talked about them in a video, and they were there for the sexual assault while Jack was asleep. And yeah, it's definitely there's a lot to it. It's very complicated. From everything that I kind of heard, it sounded to me like most of the friends in the group confirm that Jack was trying to establish boundaries, and that those boundaries either weren't being picked up by Sienna or were being just ignored. And so that's kind of mixed as to the boundaries. Now, the one sexual assault when Jack was passed out asleep, I think that one is pretty cut and dry, mainly because they didn't have an intimate relationship, like an existing intimate relationship. There was a close friendship that had been growing closer, and there was some playfulness initiated, from what it seems like, from Sienna, that Jack was apparently trying to establish boundaries on. So they hadn't. Usually when it comes down to a thing like you have a partner, well, I'm not the best person to speak on this, but usually when it comes down to a partner feeling comfortable touching, parts of your body without your consent, that's like a well-established intimate relationship over a period of time, right? Where there's been so much gradual understanding of the individuals and what they're comfortable with and where those boundaries are. And you can't really apply that in this situation, as far as I can tell. Like, I just don't see the any ability for them to establish that when Jack felt like he and his friends felt like he was continually trying to set boundaries to prevent all the intimate play that Sienna seemed to be putting forward. So that's the way that I look at it after looking at all the videos and reading the statement made by Sienna and such.
Why don't we?
I'm being quiet to let other people talk.
It's fine. Well, it's too late because we're out of time. So we're gonna move on to our next topic.